Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Economic Policy Review Committee. I'm Jason Morehouse, MHK, Chair of this committee, and with me is Mr. John Wannenberg. Please ensure all mobile phones are on silent or switched off so we do not have any interruptions. For the purpose of Hansard, I will be ensuring that only one person is speaking at a time. Today we're meeting the representatives of the Isle of Man's Financial Services Authority to discuss Moneyval, the island's appetite for risk, and the financial sector more broadly. Welcome to this oral evidence session. We are aware that there are some sensitivities around individual cases. If we ask you something that you cannot answer in public, please feel free to say so. But first, on behalf of Hansard, could we ask each of you to introduce yourselves, including your title and how long you've been in post? Thank you.
I'm Lillian Boyle. I'm the chair of the Financial Services Authority, and I've been the chair since 2018.
I'm Martina Roth. I'm the Chief Executive of the Financial Services Authority, and I have been in role since October 2021, so just under 4 years.
Thank you very much, and good morning. In terms of the past 12 months, what have been the biggest challenges you faced?
So the biggest challenges are that we have a very broad remit with many stakeholders. We have over 650 firms that we regulate. So many initiatives, many new bills that we're looking at, but overarching, as we all know, the upcoming 2026 Moneyval assessment is one of our priorities. So the challenge in this regard is that we work very closely with all the agencies that are involved in the Moneyval preparation, and that is through the Financial Crime Strategic Board, but equally other groups such as Financial Crime Delivery Group, to coordinate the preparation for this very important assessment that we'll have in October 26.
Thank you very much. Don't have any additions to you?
No, I think the Chief Executive has highlighted the key points.
Thank you very much. What changes have you brought into effect over the past few years, and how would you describe the approach and ethos at the FSA?
So we have done a number of changes. Back in 2023, we issued our revised supervisory methodology, and that was done to make sure that we spend the time and the resources on matters that matter the most. So it is a risk-based and impact-based methodology. So that means if a firm is larger and failure of that firm could do more harm to the island, or again, they operate with riskier business models, we will spend more time on supervising them, on spending time with them, versus firms that have more, let's say, a vanilla business model and are smaller firms. There we will spend less time and do more reactive supervision.
Thank you. In terms of the scale and the appetite for risk and the impact you're actually considering, does that stay constant, or have there been changes since 2023? Is it something that's been refined, or are you happy with it as it is?
So while we, as I said, it was a revised methodology, just sharpening the focus on the risk and impact, the risk appetite as such has not changed. What we look to is in the best interest of the island. We look to firms that bring good business, are here for the right reason, have a nexus to the island, and we need to make sure that in our role, and that is threefold, we are the gatekeeper, so we do authorizations. So we need to make sure we do good due diligence to make sure that anybody that doesn't meet that standard of good business, is a reputable person, is a fit and proper firm, that we make sure that they don't have an entry onto the island. Then through supervision, we make sure that a firm that has been licensed by us or is supervised by us meets all the our regulations, our standards, to make sure that they're not putting the island in disrepute. And then finally enforcement, that if a firm is not following rules, has systemic breaches, or again violations of the, for example, the AML code, that is being looked at by enforcement, and then the necessary steps are taken, which can end up in a civil penalty.
Since you sorry, go on.
I just wanted to re-emphasise, and I think we've highlighted this with the committee in the past, that not only do we have the board overarching, but we have a risk and control committee made up of board members. So the work to the wider risk, and I know that you mentioned that in your question, that is being looked at on a regular basis by that subcommittee of the board in conjunction with the executive. So there is horizon scanning, there is an active risk management section within the authority. So we take risk very seriously and accordingly manage the businesses in terms of our actions by looking at those risk results as well.
And in terms of managing that risk and those challenges, how do you keep that appropriate? Because there must be that kind of desire to become more and more risk averse and more careful in terms of what you're doing at the same time in a real world environment that's going to have an impact on businesses. So how do you get the balance right?
So it is a balancing act, but we're very aware of, the need to balance, as I said, good regulation and making sure that we keep the international standards. As an international financial center, that is obviously our USP. We need to make sure that we're well regulated, and firms tell us, we speak quite a bit to our stakeholders, that is important to them. But we do balance that off with the growth aspect. So we work very closely with the Department for Enterprise. We are working together on a number of initiatives. For example, with Finance Isle of Man is leading sustainable finance initiatives, so we are a partner in that project, and have milestone plans to assist firms if they wanted to avail themselves of sustainable finance products, that we have a framework that showcases how that can be done in a safe manner. We also work with Digital Isle of Man on the innovation side, excuse me, both in terms of the Innovation Challenge, but more broadly on the Innovation Hub. So that is for firms that are interested in setting up here on the island, and it could be either in the regulated space or the unregulated space, but we work together with Department for Enterprise to make sure that we triage that early on, meaning we can tell firms, for example, if they do need a license from us, the regulator, or it is unregulated. And we've had very, very good feedback, because even if firms are in the unregulated space, they learn from us, the team meets with them, because their clients will be regulated firms. So they want to understand how a regulator thinks and how their product could be designed to meet the needs, for example, of a client regulated firms. So we're very mindful of making sure that we are competitive. We want to ensure that our frameworks are competitive and fit for purpose. Just to give an example on that, we have worked with industry and industry associations on our captive insurance framework to do exactly that, to review how can we improve speed to market, how can we have a sandboxing facility for firms to try out things, streamlining certain requirements, and that has been very well received. That has just come into effect now. And if we compare that, for example, to the UK deregulation efforts. They're just looking at some of the matters that we have already implemented for them to do that, and they're looking at that for 2027. So we're already ahead of, for example, the UK in terms of assisting firms, to set up captives, sell companies here, and be very competitive in the international space.
I think I would also add onto it that if you look at the website, then we do have an enterprise risk appetite statement, which does get refreshed from time to time. And then, to Bettina's point, it links very much to how we manage risk through the supervisory methodology framework. So a lot of that is communicated on our website as well, and I would commend having a look at that, maybe in due course as well.
Thank you. The next question is asking about your current key objectives in relation to the financial sector. In terms of the answer you've given so far, is that in line with that, or is it something additional?
So our mandate, our three regulatory objectives are looking for good outcomes for consumers, so consumer protection. We have reducing financial crime as an objective, and we have the financial stability, making sure that there is confidence in the island as a financial center. So those are our regulatory objectives, and we continue to make sure that we execute those objectives in all the work that we do.
Thank you very much. The next question is asking, with reference to the publication in 2025 of the Supervisory Methodology Framework, it states that your supervisory approach will be more proportionate to a firm's impact as determined by its size and activities, and that you'll be transitioning from a sector risk-based approach to a wider impact and risk-led model. Can you talk us through what that actually means in practice? Because to the untrained eye, it looks like either the bigger or the smaller firms are going to get more of a focus. What's it actually mean, please?
Yes. So, as I said, in the past, we were aligned by sectors. So you had the banking sector, you had the insurance sector, trust and corporate service providers. So all the sectors that we have in financial services had a bespoke team that was doing work only on that sector. Internationally, and obviously always being very mindful of that, a regulator costs money, and we want to make sure that we supervise effectively and efficiently. Hence the point about, who really of firms causes us more risks. As I said, what is the impact of that firm? As I described before, could a failure of that firm be impactful for the island's financial stability? And as such, we have realigned the methodology, but then also have performed a restructure of our supervisory teams in line with that methodology, that for firms that don't have a balance sheet and, for example, are, as I said, lower impact, they don't have a dedicated person, but they have a dedicated team of supervisors. And we call that portfolio team, because for us, there's over 100 firms in that portfolio division. We can't have a supervisor, assigned to each firm, but we're looking at the aggregate, and because we don't spend as much time with those firms due to the lower risk, lower impact, they're handled as a portfolio. And while it has been an adjustment for those firms that were used to, having their own bespoke person to address at the authority, from a methodology perspective, but also from a cost perspective, that is an efficient way of making sure that we spend the time where it is warranted. So when we look at large firms, so banking and insurance, they continue to have the model that they have dedicated supervisors, and they will review all the prudential requirements, look at the balance sheet, make sure that that is all being adhered to, and then we have we call it a high and medium impact supervision as well. And they have firms that don't have a balance sheet, so it could be a trust and corporate service provider, it could be a financial advisor. And those firms, if they are of higher risk or higher impact, will also have dedicated supervisors assigned to them.
Thank you. Historically, the smaller firms have felt more targeted, and we're now down to 100 in that kind of category. Is 100 a number you're happy with, and will they feel more supportive now, just kind of being part of a structure rather than having the individual assessment?
So the support that they have, as I said, it's mainly driven by the firms, where, as I said, if they need to reach out to us, it's actually a better setup, because before, if you had a person and that person is, on sick leave or they're on annual leave, then they wouldn't receive a response. With a portfolio setup, there's somebody monitoring that inbox, every day, so the responses can actually be faster. So from that perspective, we feel it's actually a really good model that assists in terms of us being able to get back to firms quicker than under the previous model. I think you might be referring to, we do thematics as well. So while we've said we do less individually with firms, but we have commenced some thematic reviews where we pick a number of firms, including some of the low impact firms, to assess one particular area. And that is, again, internationally a very useful exercise, because you can look at one particular matter across a whole range of firms, and then be able, and we do reporting on that, what are some of the good practices we've seen, and what are some of the practices that are not great, and we need to make sure that they do augment those particular ones. And those are then reports, learning points for industry that we put out. So even if a firm wasn't part of that cohort to be assessed, we recommend that they look at that report and actually see, do we do those good practices, or do we have some practices that need enhancements?
And in terms of focusing on the larger companies, is there a danger that companies are going to be less attractive to come into the island, and existing firms may decide to relocate or even to cease trading by having that additional review of their businesses?
So I wouldn't say it's additional. Our larger firms are used to, having quite a bit of interaction with us. So from their perspective, I don't believe they would have seen a difference. That's how we, used to operate it. So it's really more that the lower risk firms tend to see less of us. So it hasn't been a ramp up of doing, more work with those firms. We have an engagement model that is public. We also have put out a 2-year supervisory program. So we are telling industry, what are we doing in the next 2 years on the prudential side, on the AML side, sector specifically, so that the firms can plan with ample of time before those work efforts come into focus.
I think we also have to always be very conscious of trying to get as many synergies as possible when we're working. We've got to be responsible about the resources which we have. We need to ensure that we get the proper efficiencies. We need to make sure we get cross-training across the staff, so that we are building resilience within our teams as well. And I think if you look at it and you can have that wider team effort to be able to deal with a number of firms, then it really makes us more able to concentrate where we need to be, but to be keeping a watchful eye over the rest of the firms that we're looking after.
Thank you, Mr. Wannenberg.
Thank you. Thank you. You've gone into the portfolios that you described, where previously, if I'm correct in the thinking, was it like you had an account manager per company? So are you not going spread too thinly if you go into portfolios? Just a question. And I can reinforce that question in the fact that you mentioned earlier on, you mentioned that you had reactive supervision, and then later on you mentioned you had high and medium supervision. Would some company who's gone into reactive supervision, would that have been picked up before with an account manager and was not by portfolio?
No, it's an excellent question. So, yes, supervisors were assigned to firms, but it wasn't, a 1-to-1 ratio. So a supervisor would have a number of firms assigned to them. If he had one person, per the 100 firms that are there, then alone for that we would need 100 persons. So we were never of that size. So it was always that a supervisor would have a certain number of firms. So in that sense, the change wasn't that significant. It's really what I think was hard for industry, that it's not a specific person anymore, but it is a portfolio. So it could be out of that team of 10, it could be a different person responding to your query. In terms of the reactive, I mean, I've worked in a lot of different international jurisdictions, and that model is quite common, to have a portfolio, lower risk model, and then, as I said, firms that you spend more time. It will never be possible under any model unless you had maybe a 1-to-1 supervisory ratio, which wouldn't be efficient from a cost perspective. There can be issues that occur, and both in a firm that you supervise, quite closely, and equally in a portfolio where you don't spend that much time off. So that's why we have this high and medium firm. So if we find division. If we find issues, for example, either in portfolio or, again, it can be one of the other firms that is managed more closely, then we have that ability to actually move that into the higher risk and medium impact firms, and then they receive what we call enhanced supervision. So then those issues are being addressed more closely, and our supervisors work with the firm to get them back to remediation and to good compliance.
Okay, and are you able to give us an idea of how many firms are in that category or not? Or
in enhanced supervision, I don't have the exact number, but it's a handful. It's a low number.
Could you let us know?
Yeah, we can get that.
Thank you. You also mentioned sustainable financial objectives. Mm-hmm. Could you describe a little bit more about that?
So clearly, that is something that globally a lot of regulators look at in terms of both in terms of to look at opportunities that can provide to financial services, but equally to look at that firms do not take advantage, for example, and let's say offer a green fund that maybe in reality is not a green fund and is greenwashing. So I think it's important to look at both of those aspects. The project that Finance Isle of Man is leading is a comprehensive roadmap, and we're happy to send the link. The roadmap was publicized last November at the Sustainable Finance Day, and we at the authority, we have a number of work plan items that we do, and it's under Pillar 1 under the enabling framework, and then Finance Isle of Man is leading capacity building. How do we get more capital into that space, and then the training aspect. So it's an excellent collaboration in the perspective that, again, we're future-proofing, and we have now issued some guidance in terms of if a firm looks at sustainable finance products, how would you look at that from a risk perspective, and how would the board look at sustainable finance risk and include that into their thinking when they overarchingly look at risks.
Okay, and this is the last question from that first section. You also mentioned that the regulation objectives is to have confidence in the Isle of Man as a financial centre. Mm-hmm. Would you say there is confidence in the Isle of Man?
So there is. We work very hard in terms of making sure that we meet international standards. So about a year and a half ago, we were assessed by the group of international financial center supervisors, and that was around the trust and corporate services standards that internationally are applicable. And we got, out of the 10 categories, we got 9 fully compliant, and one that they mentioned was largely compliant. We have already rectified that issue as well. And that is the best result of any country that had undergone that review. So we continue to make sure that we meet that international standard. And as I said, it is very important to our firms that we have that international approval, because that really what drives long-term business growth and long-term comfort that the island does the right thing.
Good. A very good place. Thank you. Right. Anything to add there, Lady?
I think that it just reiterate, I think it was the Chief Minister said it when we had our financial crime conference last year, that he said that ensuring maintaining the island's reputation as a first-class international finance centre is a political priority. And so I think it's very important that the FSA plays its part, but it's incumbent on all of us to be able to ensure that that reputation is maintained, and that goes wider into the other agencies that we work with, and also I think in terms of government and relationships with particularly the UK, to ensure that we are seen as a good player on an international stage.
Good, thank you. And I agree with all of that. Thank you. Right, second section we're going to go into is funding model, fees, penalties, and the FSA's culture. What do you see the role of the FSA being in the context of the island's economy? Perhaps it's a good place for you to start, because I think you finished off in your last statement.
Yes. Certainly, Bettina has highlighted a number of initiatives that we've worked on, particularly with DFE and with the Finance Agency and Digital, to ensure that we create the right environment for businesses to come to the island, for people to look for the opportunities to set up here, and that we also support them through that initial stage in terms of trying to facilitate their understanding of what we're looking for and how they may operate within the jurisdiction. So very much a joined up approach to ensuring that we play our part in encouraging people onto the island.
Okay. That would be the right answer, of course. What safeguards are in place to ensure the FSA's fee structures are fair and proportionate, especially for smaller firms and lower risk activities?
So, as you are aware, the funding journey, began in 2020 when Treasury stated that they were looking to move to a predominantly funded by industry model. At that time, the authority was funded 50-50, so 50% by industry and 50% by Treasury, which is actually quite unusual. International standards ask that the regulator is independent of government. So generally, financial centers regulators are funded by industry. That is what is expected. So since then time, we have been on a journey. The authority worked closely with Treasury, and a 3-year funding model was put forward. We had a lot of industry consultations, and that included, of course, the work included jurisdictional comparisons to make sure that we are as closely aligned with other relevant jurisdictions, so mostly Guernsey and Jersey, but from an insurance perspective, obviously Ireland is the one that is more comparable. So all of that, a lot of time and effort was spent with industry, and again, looking at the time that is being spent by the authority on the various sectors, and then again overlaying the jurisdictional comparisons with other countries. And the end result, because it was very important to give industry certainty in terms of what those increases would look like. So that's why it was a 3-year plan, and it spelled out exactly what those increases were. In the consultation, we did listen, because you had mentioned smaller firms. We then have reduced the fees for small firms that had like 2 employees, because that was the feedback that we received. And then, as I said, that 3-year journey, we have now entered the last part of that. So April 2025 was the last part of the pre-agreed increase. So that provided stability to the firms. Since that has occurred, obviously inflation, which we had anticipated at 2%, and that was baked into the numbers, clearly inflation didn't turn out to be 2%. And then in addition, really looking at our Moneyval preparation and needing additional AML resources, that has been funded at this point from Treasury, from a multi-agency bid that Treasury has supported. As Lillian said, the highest priority for the islands to make sure we are successful. So that hadn't been baked in. So now we will actually very shortly start the consultation, for this coming year. But generally we're not yet at 100% industry funded. But as I said, the word predominantly does come to mind. And we understand how difficult it is for firms, obviously, to pay regulatory fees. And that's why it's vital, and we're doing the industry comparison as we speak to make sure that we are in line with other agencies in other jurisdictions in terms of the cost that we set for industry.
Do you ever see the future being 100% industry funded or not?
I think it's a challenge because you're always trying to ensure that you are competitive in the fees that you're setting, and you have to have a certain flexibility within that. I think there's also on that classic line of the unknown unknowns, because if something really different arose in the situation that we had to then take action in a way that we had possibly not had to do previously, you might need to have some funding from government to specifically look at a project for additional resources. If we took on something additional in our remit, if the perimeter changed, then you would possibly have to have discussions on that. So what we've got at the moment works for what we're doing currently, but if that perimeter was to change or widen, then you would have to have another discussion on that matter. And firms may be less willing to pay for something that they don't consider to be absolutely essential to their survival. So I think we have to be careful about that one.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. How has the size and scope of the FSA changed in recent years?
So in terms of the scope, the perimeter has been relatively constant. As I said, the only significant change, and that really resulted, as I said, in an increase in headcount, is the Moneyval preparation, and for us to make sure that we can showcase that long-term effectiveness of financial crime measures. So that is the significant change for us.
You mentioned the headcount. What is it, please?
We are 101 staff.
And the increase by Moneyval preparation was how many?
The headcount for the AML division is 24 staff. But in terms of the additional, I'm just trying to think back when we did the joint bid. I think
you can send it to us.
Yeah, we can send that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I'll finish that section.
Thank you very much. When you were talking about the funding model, you were speaking about the contributions of the firms, but also the government. Do the proceeds from enforcement also play a role in that, or is that something you view separately?
Okay, start. So enforcement is totally separate.
Right.
Our budget gets set by the Treasury. So we have, very clear parameters in terms of what our budget is. If we needed, anything else, again, like other agencies, then we can avail ourselves to bid for those costs through the Treasury bid, and either we're successful or not successful. But obviously, there is that adherence to budget. Treasury works with us, and again, they have our budgeted income, and we do not budget for enforcement for civil penalties, because that's not something that you do, because we know we have fee income and we can predict that, but you cannot predict, civil penalties, because we only take them where we feel it's proportionate and appropriate, to do so. Civil penalties do not enter the equation for budgeting. When we issue a fine and it gets paid, we offset the enforcement costs of that. So that would be if we have external legal counsel that was involved, but then the proceeds go right to Treasury general revenues. So we don't benefit from, and as we shouldn't, we don't benefit from those fines.
And in terms of the purpose of enforcement, there are lots of different components to that, but what do you see as the main aspect of enforcement, the main purpose of enforcement?
So the FATF, the Financial Action Task Force standards are very clear. A country needs to have effective and proportional and dissuasive sanctions. And if you look at the latest Moneyval annual report that just came out in the beginning of 2025, they do point out that most countries still are not utilizing sanctions to an extent that, as I said, it is dissuasive, effective, and proportionate. So when we look at enforcement, as I said, obviously we need to show the long-term effectiveness, and having the threat of enforcement is key to any regulator, because you need to be seen as having teeth. How we then deal with that is we only look at enforcement when there's, for example, either very systemic breaches, or there's specific significant breaches that could hurt the island's reputation. And when that occurs, we have an internal referral panel that then looks at the breaches, what has happened, and then that is determined if that warrants, for example, referral to the enforcement division, or, for example, we had mentioned enhanced supervision. Sometimes cases get referred to enhanced supervision for remediation, or maybe no further action is warranted. So then the enforcement division takes on the case, looks at the situation, and generally, if they feel that, again, that enforcement actions needs to be taken, they would enter in settlement discussions with the firm. And a lot of the cases will be a settlement, and that's what you then see in the public domain. There will be a public statement, and there will be a civil penalty that can be reduced by up to 30% if the firm collaborates and works closely with us. And then again, in the public statement, there are learning points to industry, and those are critical. We get a lot of positive international feedback on those learning points, because, as I said, obviously if you pay a proportionate fine, that is dissuasive to industry, but equally we can't inspect each firm. But if we do say, please look at what somebody has been fined for, because those are the failings that were noted, please make sure that your program is effective and you don't have those failings. So that's how we look at enforcement, and we do believe we do it fairly, proportionately, but effective to showcase that we are a regulator with teeth.
I think one of the things which I know we've said to various presentations to Tynwald members is that we are, not an enforcement-led regulator. Remediation's a key part of the toolkit that we have, and we try very hard to work with firms once we've discovered issues with them to try to help them become compliant again, because it is costly and resource intensive to end up going through an enforcement process. So therefore, the more that we can get people into remediation, and we have lots of different ways that Bettina's highlighted about the way that we can do things, which includes focused inspections, the use of directions, appointment of external parties, which is done at the cost to the firm, but to assist them to get back to that compliant position. So I think it's very important that while enforcement grabs the headlines, people understand that there's a huge amount of work that goes on in the authority to try to resolve problems when they're discovered rather than take them to an enforcement stage, because that's a better way for us to have the firm successful and still be productive within the economy.
And in terms of the enforcement stage, that's going to be something you could give us a number on, but in terms of the steps towards that, is that something you're keeping records of, and is that something you could share with us in terms of
So we
changes?
do have some numbers. So in the 2023-24 year, we've had 725 inspections, and the number is made out of, we did 18 on-site inspections, 115 desk-based inspections, and then 592 were beneficial ownership inspections. You might be aware we have also oversight over beneficial ownership documentation, so we need to make sure that that is accurate. So out of those 725 inspections, we pulled together our internal referral governance panel 17 times. And not necessarily all of these meetings arose from inspections. And from those 17 meetings, 5 were referred to enforcement and 3 were referred to enhanced supervision. So you can see in terms of the amount of work that we do, how few firms actually, will end up in the enforcement division to be considered for enforcement action.
In terms of the top 2 categories, what's the difference between them? Because it's a small number of firms, but in terms of your perspective on the nature of the situation, what's the crossover point in terms of going from one to the other?
So the internal referral panel has terms of reference in terms of when they look at what constitutes a significant breach, and then, as I said, there's an independent chair of that panel, and they go through what is reasonable, proportionate in this matter, and then, as I said, a determination is taken after that. So it's a very robust process to make sure that we're consistent. To your point, Mr. Moorhouse, that things really warrant enforcement action, and it's not being taken lightly.
I think it's very important as well, sorry to interject for a moment, to think about the fact that when people get into that enforcement action and we're going towards settlement, they will have their advisors with them, and it is something that they want to achieve as well. Now, if people do not want to achieve settlement, then there is a further stage that they can go to, which is the case can be brought before the board as well. So at the moment, when you're going through the settlement process, it's dealt with by the executive, and then it can go to the board, and then following that, if an individual company is unhappy, then they have the right to go to the Financial Services Tribunal. So there is another couple of steps that are in that, and maybe just for the record, it's useful to think that over the whole period that we've had our enforcement process, one that we have at the moment. Only 3 cases have ever come to the board, and none have ended up at the Financial Services Tribunal. So always through each step you are trying to look to achieve a resolution in the process and to have both parties accept that that's where they're at. So I hope that would give a little bit more context on it.
Yeah. Now, as a layman, what causes a company to need enforcement? Why does a company behave in a manner that requires it for it to be enforced? I'm sure they don't set out to deliberately do that, do they?
I suppose there can be a number of reasons.
So, yeah, definitely a number of reasons. Sometimes we see through mergers and acquisitions, for example, that legacy systems, different way of, looking at due diligence and customers has not been, taken into account, and there's lack of that. Sometimes there's just not a robust understanding what is required. And we do see that, not necessarily exclusively, but for smaller firms that, for example, if you take designated non-financial businesses, that, they fall under the code. And yes, we're looking at proportionate programs, but that they have to have a business risk assessment. They have to have customer risk assessments. They have to be able to prove that they have considered the risks.
But they will know these things when they come here, won't they?
Well, generally they should, but to be fair, some are incumbent businesses that have operated for a long time, let's say well before the code came into effect, and again sometimes really updating and training staff and making sure that they understand what the obligations are. That's not necessarily there. And a lot of times it's also where people say, it's in my head, I know the client. But as I said, like we say with everything, nowadays you have to have the documentation to be able to showcase that you have done through that thinking, through the discussions with your client. So often that's what we see.
I think it's also, seeing the very obvious here, you do get bad actors, and it's not the job of the FSA to look at criminality, but if in the course of our inspections issues come to the fore which may indicate that there is possibilities of criminality, then we would refer that to the other relevant agencies to potentially take action. And I think you will have seen over the years that there's been a number of areas where people have either had to deal with the AGs or the police or whatever, and further steps have been taken, but there may be some involvement in terms of a regulated firm within that. So I think we have to protect ourselves against that, and by us I mean the island.
Yeah. You also mentioned earlier, Bettina, about a 30% discount reduced fee if a firm collaborates. Who decided on 30% being the right number?
So again, we have parameters, around that, and as I said, if there's collaboration, then I would say in the last few ones, generally it can be up to that full 30%.
I mean, again, to the layman, that sounds like a significant sum.
But it's not uncommon in other jurisdictions to look at that. I mean, whenever we're doing, creating any aspects of our enforcement system, we do look at other jurisdictions and how they operate. Now, 30% is not sort of, a standard across the industry, but you will have it from time to time move, and I think the UK is one where they've moved quite recently on that aspect.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just before we move on, how if with time, because I think it's 11:30, is it the end time? Is it 12 o'clock? Perfect. I thought I should check at that point. Excellent. Just in terms of getting the balance right between being the regulator and the work you do with enterprise about attracting companies here, how do you get that right? Because in some ways it must be challenging, in other ways beneficial.
So it is a balancing act, but if we look at just what we've said before, that the USP for the island is that we're well regulated, and we make sure we meet international standards. That is really attractive to new firms, new applicants to come here. So while, sometimes when there's enforcement action or we need to make sure that rules and regulations are followed, that seems harsh, but it is for the long-term benefit of the island. And as Lillian mentioned, we do not want bad actors here on the island. So if they are deterred by our gatekeeping, by us asking questions and wanting to make sure that they will be able to meet our rules and regulations, that might mean that we can't say yes to certain applicants. But what hopefully we are open to is good business where it makes sense to have it here on the island, and then we do support them, and obviously the Department for Enterprise and assists in that as well. So that's really what the balance is, to make sure that we meet international standards, but we're open and very helpful, and we have gotten very positive feedback from licensed applicants. They come sometimes directly to me and actually say, look, your team has been excellent in terms of assisting with questions, streamlining, being very helpful in that application process. So we're very comfortable that we are able to have a good balance.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We've heard that financial service providers on the island, such as banks and insurers, may be increasingly unwilling to work with companies in the gambling and trust services, viewing them as too high risk. Is this a concern that you are aware of? And if so, what plans are in place to address this? So,
for e-gaming, obviously a lot of work has gone on, and I know the committee has spoken to the Gambling Supervision Commission a couple of weeks ago. We work very closely across Financial Crime Strategic Board. We obviously government issued the e-gaming national risk assessment, risk appetite statement, and which is helpful, and obviously there were also the financial intelligence unit typology that has flown into that risk appetite statement. So our firms, as if it's banks, insurance companies, I think it was really helpful to have that risk appetite statement, and it does say, which is our general statement anyways, regardless of the risk appetite that a financial services firm has, they need to have commensurate controls in place. So, e-gaming, as we said in that risk appetite statement, if there are signs that there are higher risks present, then it is up to the firm in terms of their risk appetite. But equally, if they do want to take that on, they just need to make sure that they do the enhanced due diligence around that. So that's our position. It is really up to an individual firm what their risk appetite is. We as the regulator, have not really remit over that. It is a business decision. But as I said, now the documents that are in the public domain will enable, and we refer to them in our guidance, and we have made sure that that's incorporated, that we expect that exactly they look at the risk, what it poses for them, and then again that they take the right steps in terms of the enhanced due diligence around those clients.
So then you've set out your position very clearly, thank you. Was it a concern that you were aware of though?
Oh yeah, so as I said, we work closely with all the relevant agencies, so that we were aware of that. And to be fair, yes, there have been recent things in e-gaming, but a risk appetite about e-gaming has always been something that our banks have looked at, and other jurisdictions as well, because everybody needs correspondent banking facilities. So it is important for banks to make sure that they're very comfortable with their risk appetite and the various industries that they deal with.
Okay, thank you. I'll finish that section.
Thank you, Mr. Wannenberg. Moving on to Moneyval now. Are you satisfied with the changes that have been introduced ahead of the inspection? And what do you think the key improvements have been?
So, yes, obviously since 2016, since we had our last Moneyval assessment, a lot of learnings, have been taken on. One of the critical changes, and we alluded to that, is the establishment of a bespoke, distinct AML supervision division, which is something that Moneyval looks to. So we have established that, and obviously they have an ambitious supervision program that they're executing. The other key aspect out of 2016 evaluation was data. The importance of having data, and that is granular and in a matter that can be sliced and diced in many different ways, is key for any assessment nowadays. So we, back to 2016, we've been now on the data journey, having done, we have a warehouse, we're getting data directly into that. And then a couple of years ago, with funding from the Seized Asset Fund, we've been able to procure a distinct AML software that has a portal, and now we have 2 years of data already in our warehouse, and can slice and dice that data. So those were 2 significant steps, and then the third, I think, the collaboration with Financial Crime Strategic Board and the other agencies is another critical element that will put us in good stead when the evaluation is there, that we're working together, because collaboration between agencies is an important immediate outcome, for the assessment as well.
In terms of preparing for the next assessment, it's a challenge getting the balance right, because in terms of your day-to-day role, that doesn't change. In terms of the businesses carrying out their role, that doesn't change. So how do you actually ensure that you're moving ahead at a fast enough rate to meet the expectations of Moneyval, when most of what you're doing is saying whether or not the criminal...
Is it maybe quite important just to note, that while we're we can lead in certain areas, we aren't the overall lead for Moneyval, and that would be Cabinet Office, and therefore, to Bettina's point, it's collaboration between a number of agencies, and therefore in terms of driving the pace on some of these things, that wouldn't necessarily always come from the FSA, and I think that's maybe quite important to put out there, that there is this wider interdependency on government agencies, so perhaps just to think about that, Chair, in terms of that question.
But in terms of how the island is being viewed, you're arguably one of the key gatekeepers. So in terms of that perspective, that is different from your day-to-day role. And that was the divide I was trying to pull out, that whether or not they were coming, you still have these expectations on you. So in terms of the 2 tiers, in terms of that global expectation, just doing the right thing, which you are doing quite clearly, how do you get that right and not become kind of overly concerned and overly kind of inward looking and inward perspective, when it's the Isle of Man business and the Isle of Man that's key all the time, and the regulatory is important, but that's just...
I think it's come through our strategic planning, hasn't it, really, in terms of ensuring that we have our business as usual work along with the work for Moneyval, and in terms of where we would see our resources going, we're very, very cognizant that we need to balance both of those. So I think in terms of, demonstrating it, it's probably more in the strategic plan and the information that I think Bettina referred to about putting out our supervisory plans and such like, so people can see what we're doing, what's Moneyval related and what's more business as usual. Would that be?
No, it absolutely, we balance that. Equally, we're very mindful that we ask for a lot from industry, because as we prepare, and I've mentioned data, and I've mentioned, additional inspections, we're very cognizant that we're putting a lot of onus on our firms, on the compliance officers. But how do we hopefully manage that successfully? We do significant outreach. So we do track the number of outreach and engagement. It's over 200 a year. We have the numbers on our website. We speak specifically to compliance officers. For example, we held a session for managing directors and CEOs to make sure that they provide that assistance to their compliance officers and that the support is there, because we know we're putting a lot of burden on compliance officers. And then we had a session with the compliance officers, helping them sort of to understand the full range of their roles and responsibilities, but equally, for example, what is not, within their domain, and where, for example, they need senior support on that. So very much mindful of that. And then when we reach out for data, and Lillian mentioned that, Cabinet Office, AML Policy Office is leading the national risk assessment work, but because we have the virus to ask firms for data, they have asked us to facilitate additional granular data on legal persons and arrangements. So that was for our trust and corporate service sector. And to be fair, that was quite a tight turnaround in terms of the data that was required. But to our point, we're doing that to assist the island to have a really good national risk assessment that is being underpinned by data, which that's what the evaluators will be looking to. But it does mean that we're asking a lot from industry. What we do say when they say, everybody is stretched in the compliance area, that is true. But as I said, we work on training. We're there to assist. So if you have any questions, if something is not clear, because a lot of times it's more the worry about not understanding what is required versus sometimes doing it. So we're there. We're providing outreach. We're working with the University College in terms of compliance courses, and we have some of our staff are mentors to young students. So we're trying to do a lot on the capacity building as well, because we know we're asking for a lot. But we wouldn't be asking it if it wasn't for the good of the island.
And it's a difficult position for both you and the actual individual businesses. But in terms of excuse me, ensuring that the specific guidance is hitting the right note, how are you actually monitoring that feedback in terms of the business's behaviour and their responses? Is that something you're looking at as well specifically?
So we have very good interaction with all the industry associations. So, their members will feed feedback into those associations. We meet regularly with them. We ask them, for example, what their members would feel, what are topics that say that they're struggling with, or, sometimes if they need an extension on something, again, they feed that into the association, and then we provided, additional time for the deadline. So it's a very collaborative and interactive back and forth, because we do need to know what the firms are feeling. Can we do anything? Sometimes it's understanding, even for industry, that, as I said, if you don't have a choice in the matter, it's something that we do definitely need. We've worked with firms then around the data points that we're asking for, to make sure it's actually data points that they have, that they are able to provide. So again, I think I would say collaboration and listening to feedback, and where we can, as I said, being very responsive to feedback to assist.
Thank you. Some sectors will be especially challenging, and we've heard already that e-gaming is one of them. In terms of e-gaming, it's one of the key sectors for the economy. As you're kind of moving forward and looking at the island's KYCs, AML or CFTs. In terms of increasing regulation, how do you get the balance right in terms of what is seen as needed by the regulator and what is acceptable for the firms? Because the firms can move, but at the same time they want to kind of be in a strong, safe jurisdiction. But how do you get that pincer movement correct without going too far, but ensure you've gone far enough? That must be really quite challenging.
One of the things that Bettina's highlighted, in the earlier discussions, was really about proportionality, and trying to do things that you have to do to achieve international standards, but at the same time understanding the businesses that you regulate and what they are capable of doing and what are the resource constraints on them. And I think the last comments that she made, particularly about as assisting in terms of trying to build compliance resilience within the island, is a very important one. So yes, I think it's a very good question to ask us, but you have to say you have got to reach those international standards because you've got to have the economic growth that the island wants to have and to be seen to be a good player. But at the same time, you have to put on the regulations which actually fit with the businesses that you have within your regulatory perimeter. So I think that's where we would probably come from on that.
And just in terms of meeting those international standards, which are going to be key, and ensuring that the gaming sector is able to move forward, is a balance that is becoming more challenging?
Well, we can't specifically talk to e-gaming.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's
Yeah.
not in the remit, and that's
No.
the Gambling Supervision Commission.
Yeah.
I think I would reiterate what we had mentioned, that that financial services firms, in terms of their clients, they need to look at their risk appetite, and then they need to determine what enhanced due diligence, what measures they do need to take to make sure that the risk is adequately addressed. And that's what we say to all firms. And back to Lillian's proportionate point, if a firm has lower risk clients and is smaller, we don't expect the same standards of, let's say, a highly complex large firm with interesting structures and complexities. It should be commensurate to the risk that the firm takes on, and that's what our risk-based framework is, and that's what also the international assessors look to. It does need to be risk-based, so there is proportionality around there.
Since I took this role on, there's been that challenge getting the banking support, and as we move through time, there's other aspects of support that become more and more challenging. So certain sectors like e-gaming are surely going to have more and more challenges operating on the island. And in terms of that, is that something that you consider and discuss with the other agents in terms of getting that balance right? Because it must be a hard one to actually get right.
I think it goes to Bettina's point earlier about risk assessment is a commercial decision for the organisations who are in the relationship with, and it doesn't matter whether it's e-gaming companies, whatever businesses that they're dealing with. So that is their commercial decision, but they are able to do enhanced due diligence, and if they can demonstrate that, then that is what we would be looking for. But I think we've also highlighted to you that we speak to the GSC on a very regular basis. We talk a lot with DFE. We're also talking with finance and digital agencies. So the communication that goes on between us should ensure that there is an understanding of the problems, which, problems, issues, and also hopefully areas where we can bring solutions, within all of those agencies. So it is a wider pact that needs to work together on those. So perhaps less just driven by us, but we need to keep an awareness of what is going on when those areas where businesses that we regulate will have relationships.
Thank you. And in terms of the regulators, do you feel you've received adequate updates and support in terms of preparing for the the inspection? Because that's kind of a key question, that you're expected to do all these things, but have you been given that support and advice that you require?
So when we asked Treasury for the joint bid, so the fact that Treasury then accepted that bid and provided the resources, because without, and not just for the authority, but again, cross agencies received funding for additional positions. That obviously was crucial. So that was fantastic. Equally, in 2022, there was a diagnostic report that was commissioned by AML Policy Office for an international firm to see, to do a gap analysis. Where are we now versus, where we need to be in future. And that obviously was very important in terms of that crystallized then the now approved financial crime strategy 2024-27, and then equally a very ambitious roadmap for all the agencies in terms of pointing out what the various steps and projects that need to be completed. So obviously we continue on that action plan and make sure that we can cover all of that. And in addition, currently AML Policy Office also has a couple of international assessors, experts in the field that do exactly that, Mr. Moorhouse, that provide feedback, give some guidance, because as I said, these international standards never stand still, but only increase. So it's very important that we work with people that are in the field, have done other jurisdictions successfully. The expert that we're currently utilizing was a key person in their Jersey assessment, so that I feel we are well guided. And the newly changed structures, with obviously Minister Prue Wilson now being responsible for AML, and then Dan Davis as CEO of Department for Home Affairs, chairing the Financial Crime Strategic Board, and then the various committee underneath that put us in good stead.
Thank you. We're still quite a way off in terms of the inspection, but it's going to kind of be immediately after the next general election, and the time will vanish quite quickly. In terms of your preparedness, do you feel that you are where you should be, and that's in terms of the risks that they're all being adequately managed at this point?
So, as you said, there's still a while to go, over a year. So it would be too early to project where we'll be for the evaluation. But as I said, all the different agencies are working really closely together, working on their action plans. And as I said, with the structures that we have in place. And we do have an international assessors group, so they do periodic checks in terms of where that progress is. We certainly, we're working towards meeting those international standards.
Thank you. Mr. Wannenberg.
Thank you. So, again, from a layman's perspective, what you've just described to me would be something like a mock exam that you're going to pass, hopefully with the aim of passing the real thing. Correct?
Yeah, so as I said, right now the mock exams are, not a full one, but again, on the different IOs, for example, where the assessor team says, exactly if the assessment is today, how would we fare on that? So yeah, you could say they're sort of mini mocks.
Yeah.
Big mocks, and we know that from 2022 and from other agencies, they take a huge commitment of time as well in terms of preparing for that. So as I said, currently those mini mocks are less onerous, because if you prepare for a mock, then you're actually putting down some of the project work. So we feel that gives us a good understanding in terms of where we are and how we're progressing.
Good. And you did mention, I think, Lillian, that it's a cabinet-led office initiative, and you're getting full political support, I would anticipate.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think it is a very big exercise in collaboration, and I can even see that Richard, who's with us in our audience, is going this afternoon to the communications group there. So, it takes in all parts of the authority to make sure that we've got the collaboration working in a strong manner.
Good. And is there anything you don't have that you need?
Well, we could always wish for more, but I think we're probably, as we're coming up to, making our bids to Treasury, probably that's the appropriate way for us to go at the moment on that.
Thank you. Okay, right. Onto the effectiveness of AML, CFT, and the enforcement purpose of the FSA. Concerns exist that compliance is a tick box and doesn't catch criminals. How does the FSA ensure its AML CFT regime is genuinely effective in disrupting financial crime? Forgive me if you've touched on some of this already.
Yep, but no, I'm happy to cover that. So I think it's very important to remember that we're not looking to say, has money laundering occurred? Obviously, that is with law enforcement. So what the authorities' remit is for us to make sure that there's preventative controls for firms in place. So that's very important, because sometimes industry, has that perception that it's ticking boxes. But really what it is, we have to have a program here as a country, all our financial services and designated businesses, that are there strong preventative, detective mechanisms in place that deter financial crime. So it's a misnomer to saying, oh, we didn't do something and I'm pretty sure there's no money laundering, so why am I being fined? Because we're talking about two different things. So we will be evaluated on, as a country, as I said, do our firms understand the risks that they're taking, again, have protocols in place to then make sure that they assess the risks of their business, their customers, their technology, and then do the commensurate controls around that. If something is money laundered or not money laundered is actually not a determination. It could be, for example, they would file a suspicious activity report that then goes to the FIU, and again, the FIU could enforce law enforcement agencies to say, look, we think there's something untoward, so there could be obviously work being done by law enforcement agencies. But from the role that we have as the regulator, that's not our role. We're looking for compliance with the code, the AML code, and if we see systemic or significant matters that are missing in that preventative control framework, that's what then potentially warrants enforcement. So it's very different concepts. And for example, if we take, paying away court restricted funds, again, it's not, was the amount significant, or again, is that individually somebody who has been, convicted of money laundering? It is, if a court restricts funds, there's very good reason to do that. And if a firm pays away those funds, that is a significant failure. So I think for firms sometimes to justify why they feel it's not significant, they would call it tick boxing, or, but not exactly, that wasn't financial crime. But they forget what the true objectives are of a regulator in terms of those preventative systems, and what's we're charged to do. And law enforcement worries about, criminal breaches, if that helps.
Fine. And in fact, you've answered the next question already. But going back to what you've just said, if there's been a significant failing and they've had to pay a fine, then again, this red flag is waving to me, well, why do they get 30% off?
Well, to be fair, we do want that they work with us to get to a settlement. And as I said, I think Lillian touched on that. Internationally, there is a discount. If anything, I think some jurisdictions actually have a higher discount. I think it goes up to 50%, which industry does point to. but it is for that collaboration and making sure that, you know, we do get to a timely conclusion, because those enforcement cases, as you could expect, do take, you know, significant time. So it is something that assists in terms of, you know, getting that over the line. But yeah, it's and a lot of times the issue for the firms is not so much the monetary value, even though it can be quite significant. It normally is the public statement, because you don't want to be seen in the public domain as, you know, somebody that doesn't have their controls in place.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. In terms of your movement since 2016, has it been a case of increasing regulations and increasing expectations, or has there been a balance in terms of some things have gone, other things have come in, and is there that continuous assessment of what's in place, and do things have certain periods of use before they simply become burdensome and have no real advantage?
So if we go back to the 2016 evaluation, and obviously then the focus was on technical compliance. We did very well, so 39 out of the 40 technical markers we had fully compliant, and then one largely compliant. And then, you know, code changes were made back, I think then 2019, I want to say. Since we have been working so closely on the Moneyval preparation, we have actually looked at to see, do we need to update the code, and have felt that, because again, we have those technical markers, and generally we are in good shape with the code. We didn't make changes to that. I mean, we introduced a travel rule, which is sort of in the crypto aspect. So the DHA introduced the travel rule in 2024, and we've done a couple of housekeeping changes, but we haven't done anything significant. So if anything, for industry, the code has stayed the same. So when we started, you know, to ramp up our inspection program, we were actually quite surprised that in some areas compliance was quite weak, when we hadn't introduced new standards. So now, you know, we've been working with firms for the last few years, so we do see standards improve, but it's not to the fact that we're saying, oh, there's a lot of new standards that we have introduced, so it's hard to, you know, get up to that speed. Those requirements have been in place since 2019. So for firms to saying they're not in compliance doesn't reflect well on their program and them updating the standards and making sure that they can do that. So this intensive outreach, training, and inspection program is highlighting areas that we would have expected would have been self-identified by firms, you know, much earlier on.
Thank you. Mr. Wannenberg.
No.
Do you want to take on the Section 8?
Question. We're nearly there.
We are.
What is your accountability framework for the FSA's own actions, and where they occur your own shortcomings?
Yes, I mean, I suppose that's really where the board comes in terms of the reports that we receive from the executive. The board, if you will recall, other than the chief executive, is appointed by Treasury, so it's independently appointed. We're not appointing ourselves, and the recruitment, when we go out, we're looking always for skill sets that are going to be relevant to where we see the authority, not just currently being, but going forward as well. So within that, we will have the board. The board then has various subcommittees. I mentioned earlier the risk and control one, where it's looking very, very closely at the risk management within the organisation, and also the risks that we may be facing externally as well. So again, trying to very much see whether the actions that we're taking are appropriate and commensurate with what our remit currently is. We also have an HR committee where we're looking at our people side, and also understanding the resources that we have and the commitments that we're utilising there as well. So within all of those frameworks, we're getting reports and we're looking at things. we also, we haven't really touched on it this time round, but we're obviously the resolution authority for the island in terms of banking, and we have a subcommittee of the board which looks into that as well. So we're carrying out that work at the same time as we're doing all of the others, and that's an area where there's quite a few developments, and I'm sure in some future meeting we could have a discussion on that as well. So we hope that we've put in the right lines of defences. We've got internal audit within government coming to reviews on us, and as Dina has referred to as well, from time to time we've had independent consultants to assist in our work and almost test whether we're doing the right things, and that's been particularly true with the Moneyval work that we've been doing through the auspices of the relationship with Cabinet Office.
And you're satisfied?
Yes.
And then
That's enough for me.
maybe just to add, we also report quarterly to Treasury Board. We provide a report beforehand, and then again I attend to answer questions, queries. Obviously from a budget perspective we are accountable to Treasury, and we do always make sure that we come in on or under budget. We have a very comprehensive annual report that we publicize. We have a number of metrics on our website. That was something that we heard from an independent industry survey that we do about every 3 years or so, that more transparency would be welcomed. So we have started to put more key performance indices on our website and continue to do so. Again, the industry survey is also there. The last one was in 2023, and the full report, and then our action plan coming out from that, and then what we have achieved is also on the website. So we do, and Lillian touched on this, the strategic plan that we have just issued last year as well. So a number of
And obviously we come before yourselves as well.
Hope that's not been too taxing for you today.
Hopefully it gives us an opportunity to discuss what I think are really key issues for the island, because I think, if we've said, it's really paramount importance for long-term success and growth that we are meeting the international AML standards, that we don't cut corners, that we really succeed, and that we do our best for the island.
Thank you. That's a perfect way to end. We've got a small number of questions. If you send those in writing, will that be acceptable?
Yes.
Thank you very much.